Okay, I know we're going to have some people filing in late. First of all, thank you so much for being here today. I know it's a very busy week here on the Capitol, and it's getting busier and busier, but we're very happy to have you here, and as a hopefully active participant in our Congressional briefing series. We have a wonderful program today. Two longtime partners and friends of the ICCF, the World Wildlife Fund, which was one of our founding partners, and Safari Club International Foundation, which has, I think, been a partner with us for about a year and a half now, but we've been in talks with and seen along the way with our friends over Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus Foundation for quite some bit. So this is definitely a wonderful opportunity to have two of these great partners talking about how they're collaborating together and the issues that they're working on together. I won't talk too much, except to say that ICCF is now in its 9th year, and that the U.S. Congressional International Conservation Caucus, which we help support in the House and the Senate, is now and continues to be the second largest caucus on Capitol Hill. Our friends over at the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, I think, are still the largest there. But it's a testament to the staff of those offices who have continuously supported us, not only in their attendance, but their proactive outreach after these programs, getting more information and bringing us in to talk to some of their colleagues, as well as their members. I'm going to introduce a new friend of ours, Digu, who has allowed me not to try to pronounce his last name, and he is the head of the Namibian Tourism Board, and he is going to introduce a short video. So Digu, welcome to Washington.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Basically, to start off with, I think we are delighted to be here in Washington to really share with you the profoundness of us as Namibians in terms of articulating nature conservation vis-a-vis tourism, and how do you balance the two for coexistence. Namibia is one of the countries in the world that has enshrined in its own constitution conservation. In order to be able to actualize and realize such programs, we have actually an initiative called Community Natural Resources Management Program, CBRNM for short. The premise of this program is basically working with the communities in communal land, because I'm not sure how familiar you are with the geographical setup of Namibia, because when we talk about communal lands, it's a vast land of area where local communities are living. It's not an urban center. Government, after the independence from South Africa, when the wildlife and environment was degraded, through this program has started relocating and translocating wildlife into these areas where communities have set up programs to safeguard this wildlife by virtue of actually using it as an anchor, as a tourism. So through tourism, they are able to sell, we call it a non-consumptive tourism activities, being the art crafts and so forth that they are selling, and the money that is being generated either also through joint ventures are then put in the community trust funds, which then are used to rehabilitate water boreholes and also contributing towards building clinics wherever government will then provide staff for that purposes. So basically that's the balance between conservation and tourism, because we're looking at conserving the environment, but at the same time exposing that environment to tourists that to be able to generate income, which then is then put towards further conservation and protecting our natural resources. And I think Namibian government has been doing that through assistance with some of the global partners, including USAID, as well as WWF, and very recently also through MCC, MCA compact that the two governments have signed up. So that is exactly the programs that we are actually using to really conserve environment, but using tourism as an anchor to generate income. Should tourism have not been happening, I think most of the rural communities would have been moving into urban centers and cause more of an overcrowding in that urban centers, and of course looking for greener pastures to get jobs. But staying in rural, remote communities, still people are able to make money, and then through that also they are protecting our wildlife and our biodiversity. I think that is the showcase, and that has been an exemplary model. Throughout the years we have been improving this model, and it has become one of the more sought after models in the world, particularly in Southern Africa. Besides the conservancies within the Namibian context, I think there's a greater thing in the Southern Africa to go beyond the borders. We call it a transfrontier conservation areas, that meaning the wildlife are actually migrating, especially your big herds of elephants and buffaloes, because it's not only contained in one given country, because it moves along other borders as well. So governments have put together their heads and expanded the conservation efforts. In short, I think if you look at the conservation in Namibia, in fact, of the land size is about 42%. I'm told, if my geography serves me very well, our land size is close to the state of Montana in terms of what is under protected area currently in this our country, and that allows the free ranging of our wildlife to make sure that they have a migratory routes, and as well as enough space where they can breed to continue procreating in terms of their setup, and also working closely with us as the human beings are also living in coexistence well, although there is a conflict here and there, but of course tourism helps to balance out that conflict that the wildlife are making in terms of probably destroying boreholes, but then you make money through tourism, which then helps in rehabilitating those boreholes, and that way you are actually creating a balance. And therefore, I think our mission today is to really share with you our prestigious model that we have done through by way of a video that we will be showcasing to you, that you should be sharing with us today, to just learn and share, even if there are any inputs for us, how best you think we could improve on that model. So that is basically our journey today and our mission, to share with you this noble initiative that we have actually started in Namibia, which is at the southern tip of our of African continent, close to the border of South Africa. Basically, that's where we are seated. And I think, please sit back and enjoy the video with us.
We're going to actually save the video, I think, for the end now. So I'd like to introduce Tom Dillon from the World Wildlife Fund, who runs their field programs, to discuss what they're doing in Namibia. And before he just starts, I just wanted to recognize a couple other people from WWF here. We've got Vanessa, who works in the Government Affairs Department, who we work at a day-to-day basis with over at ICCF. So Vanessa, if you stand up so everybody can see who you are. And then Will Gatshore from WWF, also, I think, head of U.S. government policy over at WWF. And I'd also like to point out Melissa Simpson here, who runs government policy for the Safari Club International Foundation. So thanks so much for being here. And one more person before we start this I want to point out is, I know a lot of people have talked to her, and I don't want to forget, is Dr. Lori Marker with the Cheetah Conservation Fund. Are you around here? There you are. Okay. Sorry, I should have done that at the beginning. Anyway, Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here today with ICCF, with all of you from the Hill, with Safari Club International, and most importantly, with the Namibian government representatives, and also the Cheetah Conservation Fund. If you haven't been to Namibia before, you really need to go. There is nowhere better to see African wildlife. And if you go, you are visiting African wildlife in a way in which you're helping with the conservation of the heritage of Southern Africa. And I hope that through what I say and what Safari Club International says and NTSB, you'll get a picture of that. I'm just going to give a brief overview of what has gone on to make such a success story in Namibia. I've been calling it lately the greatest untold story, but I noticed that there was something at the beginning that said the greatest story ever told. But not many people really know, not many Americans yet know about Namibia. So I still think it's the greatest untold story. How do I, which button do I push on this? Okay. This is a story about large landscape conservation that is being done by the government, but also largely by communities, which is very rare around the world. WWF works in 100 countries around the world, and there are very few other places I could tell you about that in which communities and indigenous people are as heavily engaged in conservation as in Namibia. People think that community-based conservation can only be done at a tiny scale of communities. This is an example where actually large-scale conservation is occurring through community-based conservation, where 1 out of every 8 people in the country lives within one of the communal conservancies. I'm going to see if I can get this at the projector. Okay. Which arrow? There are 4 arrows here. All right. So just to orient you, here's where Namibia is. It has a small population because it's a fairly arid country. It becomes wetter as you go east, but particularly in the west and the central parts of the country, it is quite arid, which limits the population size, a little more than 2 million. It was a country under the control of South Africa until it won its independence in 89-90 and threw off the reins of apartheid. The story I'm going to tell begins in 1993 when there are efforts to catalyze what is now this communal conservancy movement. And now it has become a real movement in which there are 14.5 million hectares of land under conservation in these green areas. The green areas are the conservancies. They represent 36.5 million acres. It's a huge percentage of the country, 17%. The brown areas are official national parks run by the government. And as you can see, many of the green areas abut the brown. What that allows for is connectivity between, say, Etosha National Park, which is a very famous area up in the center, and these the green areas that are the communal conservancies. So this is, in my opinion, it's the holy grail of conservation, which is large landscape level conservation through communities. So I think you'll see this in the video that the government is showing, but it's a country of spectacular landscapes and unusual wild landforms, amazing wildlife. Here's you can see that there's also a lion behind that's about to pounce on this giraffe. Cultural diversity. Most people are rural, and most people are cattle and goat herders in the country. This movement that has allowed for 66 conservancies to be created started with a national policy change in 1996, in which communities were given the ability to create conservancies by having the rights over their own wildlife, to having ownership of wildlife. And therefore, they could get the revenue from tourism, as was stated earlier, as well as from trophy hunting and other areas. This picture is a community and a discussion about there are management committees that run each of these conservancies, and they're elected, and there are 66 elected governance bodies. It allows for strong gender empowerment and that there are a significant proportion of women in these committees. It also, these committees serve as a vehicle not only for conservation but for health, agriculture, and other services that are difficult to provide unless there's an organization of some kind, which is what these committees allow for. The way in which the conservancies make money is, number one, through tourism. It's increasingly Namibia is increasingly well known for tourism, and the private sector has partnered with these rural communities to create very high-end, often very high-end tourism lodges, in which they pay an annual fee to the communities to run them, and then they employ only people from the conservancy. And so the employment benefits are quite significant, as you'll see in a slide I'll show later. Sustainable wildlife use, which means trophy hunting, is also a major source of revenue in the country, which is European and North American hunters mainly. And then increasingly, other ways of making money include campsites, crafts, medicinal herbs, and so forth. So there are, within these conservancies, about 1,500 full-time employees, about 8,000 part-time jobs. So it's with every job benefiting about 7 to 8 other people. So you can see that in a country without a large population, these are significant sources of employment. This is to show you how, this is still a nascent movement inside the country, and how fast it's grown in terms of revenue that it's generated. This was, the program was kicked off with a lot of support from the U.S. government. There was a program called LIFE, which stood for Living in a Finite Environment, that USAID supported for about 15 years. And because of the staying power of the U.S. government's funding, it became this incredible success story. It takes more than 5 years for something like this to happen. After 5 years, you can see there wasn't much funding yet going into these conservancies, and there weren't many conservancies. It takes time to build capacity, particularly working in which it's the rural people who have very little formal education and who have just come out of a conflict situation to organize themselves into a system like this. And I think the U.S. government should be applauded for the support it's given. And then when USAID funding ended, there was a hiatus of a few years, but the Millennium Challenge Corporation has come in, seeing that this system, and particularly tourism, is such a major economic force in the country and major force for conservation. And the MCC's attempt is to get the revenue to the household level to the greatest degree it can be. Also to empower these conservancies by helping them have part ownership of lodges, both within their own areas and within national parks, such as the famous Etosha in the country. So you can see that how revenue has grown quickly and continues to through this system. You're probably not able to see this, but just so you see the proportion, 57% of it is from joint venture tourism, and 40% is from hunting concessions. Overall, this represents $260 million of Namibian dollars a year, which is about 34 million American dollars, and growing significantly. So I've talked a bit about the economics and the organization of this, but why is an organization like World Wildlife Fund involved? Well, we have seen demonstrable growth in endangered species populations. So Namibia has the largest free-roaming rhino population in the world, which, if you know what's happening right now in Africa, that's highly significant because there is a crisis of rhino poaching going on for a demand that is growing in East Asia, particularly in Vietnam. There was a Vietnamese diplomat who returned from southern Africa to Hanoi, and he told people in Hanoi that rhino horn helps with curing cancer. And that was about 2 years ago. And in the past 2 years, there has been a massive increase in rhino poaching around southern Africa, but not in Namibia. There haven't been any black rhinos poached in Namibia, and it is largely because the government is doing a much better job than other southern African governments in terms of conservation, and the communities who have rhinos are also looking after theirs because they have this direct economic benefit. So, because of the Conservancy movement, the population of rhinos has really increased. In the 1970s, there were only about 350 black rhinos left in the country. Now there are more than 1,500. There were 7,500 elephants in 1995. Now there are more than 16,000. And this is largely because of these large landscapes I was talking about, and these conservancies abutting the national parks. There's a lot of research on migration of species. This is tranquilization of migratory elephants in the Caprivi in the eastern part of the country. If you've never smelled elephant breath, I don't recommend it. The plant materials that spend a long time in the stomach of the elephant have a really powerful stench. And this is a picture of me when last year during a tranquilization, and in which there was a collar, a satellite collar being put on an elephant. And that little stick there is to enable the elephant to continue to breathe, because if its trunk closes, then it could suffocate. So in addition to rhinos and elephants, there's been a huge increase in lions. In 1995, there were only 20 lions. Today, there are more than 130. That's a pretty massive increase when much of Africa is undergoing decimation of lions. This is showing the range expansion over time out of Etosha National Park through the conservancies in the northwestern part of the country to the national park on the western coast. So range expansion of lions is very rare. In fact, it's not occurring in other parts of Africa, and this is an incredible example of that. So we have this great success story right now, and people think, well, then is everything over? And is this sustainable? Is Namibia's communal conservancy system sustainable? And the answer is not yet. The MCA project that I mentioned is a wonderful bolster to this system in the country. On the other hand, there are still significant challenges. There's a policy environment in which some people still perceive conservation as a threat to other traditional land uses like agriculture. The communities in those green areas on the map, they don't own the land, so they own the wildlife, and they own the rights to the wildlife, but they don't own the land. And so that is still a potential risk. Climate change, of course, as it is everywhere in the world, will increase competition if there's less water. At the same time, it's an advantage for wildlife because a lot of these species are drought resistant, in which cattle are not. We estimate that currently this system is only about at 15% of its economic potential at this point. So there's an opportunity for a lot more, particularly from tourism, but also from the other forms of revenue, for there to be much greater for this to be an even much greater economic revenue system. But it's at the point at which a lot of other countries are trying to learn from Namibia. And there are lots of other, not only Southern African countries, but other countries in Africa coming to see what is happening in Namibia. They want to learn about this incredible success story. And besides Africa, people from other countries are coming, from Asia, North America. This is, maybe I need to push it again. There's a circle. Yeah, there it is. This is called the Transboundary Conservation Area, which was recently announced by the heads of state of the 5 Southern African countries. And it's a treaty in which they want to enhance cooperation across borders, largely based on the understanding that tourism from conservation is a huge economic force in Southern Africa, and that if the countries can cooperate better together, it can be much more of one. This is just, I love this picture. This is a group of Mongolians who've been visiting Namibia and learning from the system there and trying to bring it back and have something similar in Mongolia. This is a group from the northern Great Plains of the United States. I wanted to actually read from the blog of one of these guys, Dan O'Brien, on the far left, who, after he visited Namibia, to give you a perspective of an American going there, who was highly skeptical when we brought him to Namibia. He thought, what is it that he could learn there? And a quote from him is, "We've decimated the treasure that is the Great Plains and the people who once had it to themselves. Both are on the verge of extinction, but if small, poor, politically nascent Namibia can find a way to bring the natural things back to balance, then big, wealthy, politically sophisticated America can certainly come to grips with the fact that all we really have is our ecosystem." What Dan realized, he was there also with Native American leaders and local government who came to, they've been 3 trips from the Northern Great Plains, was that actually Namibia was farther ahead in terms of figuring out how to make money from their natural assets than we are in where he's from in South Dakota. And there's active work to actually bring some of the lessons from Namibia now into Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, so that people in those areas can have more of an economic force from their own nature. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Well, certainly the WWF's, their work in Namibia and their LIFE program has been a consistent example that ICCF has used for many, many years on the success of proper natural resource management in the developing world and all that can be accomplished. So they're doing a lot of real great work. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you a good friend of ICCF, Joe Hosmer, who runs Safari Club International Foundation, and we're very lucky to have Joe here today. So, Joe.
Thanks, sir. Good morning. Nabu, Tom, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate you being my opening act. Unfortunately, you took most of my information, but that's okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm Joe Hosmer. I'm president of Safari Club International Foundation. I've been a lifelong hunter. It's been a family tradition. Our family's been doing it for about 200,000 years, as near as I can tell. It's been a passion that I've enjoyed, and it's taken me all around the world. Because of that passion, I've also been very drawn and very protective of the wildlife. And that's taken me to the position, as I say, as president of the SCI Foundation. A little bit about the foundation is that Safari Club International realigned a couple years ago and took and separated the foundation. And at that point I took over as the foundation president. And we have three pillars in the foundation: conservation, wildlife education, and humanitarian services. And I usually say off the record that it's the softer, gentler side of SCI. We have worked on a global basis for many, many years. Sure. Okay. I'll have to go back on the record now. Over the past decade, we've spent about $50 million to advance global wildlife conservation. SCIF has worked tirelessly to increase wildlife management capabilities throughout southern and eastern Africa. We've built strategic partnerships with African nations, conservation NGOs. In Namibia, in an instance, SCIF is working with the government to obtain best science available on leopard populations. We're currently studying that in conjunction with the Namibian government. We've awarded many grants for conservancies of black rhino and have helped along the way with the rhino population, building that up. And as Tom said, and I won't belabor it, that's a real success story of Namibia. In regards to the crisis of poaching, we have spent thousands of dollars underwriting the training of game rangers, what we would call in this country game wardens, but game rangers, field rangers. We've provided aircraft, trail cameras, telemetry service, and any other type of tools that we possibly can to take and curb, stop, prevent poaching and smuggling. One of the largest programs that SCIF does in Africa is the African Wildlife Consultative Forum, AWCF. AWCF is an annual forum that convenes delegates from most all of the sub-Saharan governments, nations. It's a week-long discussion of wildlife management and hunting practices. It brings together the conservation NGOs, United Nations, Fish and Wildlife Service, traffic, all the professional hunting associations and ministers of wildlife and tourism in the areas of southern and eastern Africa. In 2011, the AWCF met in the Kingdom of Swaziland. We had professional biologists come in and talk about cats, talk about the African lion, and came to an agreement of working in concert to create a population study of the African lion, pool all resources, all the information, and do this in preparation of the CITES coming up here in 2013. We've also got together with the nations and worked with the professional hunting associations on best practices in science, best practices in ethics of hunting. And this has been a real eye-opener, and we signed a memorandum of understanding this year that would take all of the PH associations to coordinate with the country and work closely. Namibia is a prime example where they do not typically oversee ethical issues in hunting and in game management. That is left to a group called NAFA, the Namibian Association of Professional Hunters. That group manages and oversees and patrols their own. And they work in concert as the boots on the ground group of the Namibian government. This is a model that we've taken and worked in Mozambique and other parts around the world or across the continent, which will pay benefits in terms of taking and developing a good ethical foundation for the hunting portion of wildlife sustainable use. Hunting is funded the enhancement of many projects around the world. Here in North America, it's been the result of elk, white-tailed deer, wood duck, wild turkey, bighorn sheep, pronghorn antelope, plains bison, and more. This money comes from license fees and taxes on hunting gear that fund conservation around the United States. That underwrites all of our conservation. The majority of our conservation is through this taxation process. International hunters, as we were talking earlier with Tom, from Germany, from Europe, and from the United States that go overseas or specifically to Namibia or Africa for hunting, their revenue that they bring with them provides that same sort of financial support. I think Tom's statistics was 40% of this activity of hunting goes to the local communities. International hunting has been one of the main economic engines in rural communities. Many of the countries in southern Africa continent, cannot support agriculture and pasture. It's lands, it's bush. It's what we call bush, and it's been wildlife-based. And so any wildlife-based economy is going to thrive as long as they have that sustainable consumptive resource. Community-based national resource programs essentially devolve power from the central government so that the locally created community councils can regulate and manage wildlife in their own specific areas. Their mission is to utilize wildlife so that it remains a sustainable resource. And I want to underline that word sustainable. Sustainable resource can be trees, it can be anything that we think of that can grow our fisheries. Wildlife is a sustainable resource, and we have to guard it. We have to guard it very carefully. SCIF has worked hard on establishing guidelines that will maintain very healthy populations of wildlife. And we do not hunt in areas where that population is not strong and not healthy. These communal programs have been successful because they are effectively creating a financial incentive for the rural communities to actively conserve wildlife. Money generated from sport hunting ends up in the hands of the indigenous people. In the case of international hunting in southern Africa communities, in most rural areas, the countries reap the benefit of conserving wildlife through community-based natural resource programs. I can't say that enough. And Namibia is a great example of that. The campfire program was in Zimbabwe and other places around the world. This works. Asia is starting to pick up on the same type of program. Tom said that, Tom said that. I gotta cover this. Yep, Tom said that too. The rhino poaching in Namibia was one of the things I was going to talk about. And they've done an outstanding job there. And because these animals have a value that's so important to the community, and it becomes an asset, it becomes a resource. We have a situation in Kenya, northern and western Kenya. Those parts of the country take lion as vermin. Lion have discovered that cows taste pretty good. You know, that's a good thing to go eat. And they're fairly handy, they're around. So what happens in Kenya is the lion is poisoned. And then you have that ripple effect. Then comes the hyena, the jackal, the vulture. All of these things that feed off of the carcass of the lion who's been poisoned now die as well. To the south in Tanzania, to go and have a sport hunter come in and hunt a lion generates $50,000 to $75,000. We see it all the time. People will go into Tanzania to hunt a lion, and they'll pay $50,000 to $75,000 as a trophy. That money, the concession that the person is hunting on, is fees are paid to the government. There's a trophy fee that's paid to the government. Those monies taken support wildlife management, scientific studies, and game rangers to go out and protect that asset. The concession holder takes and employs again from Tom's speech, employs the local indigenous community to come in and provide all the services, the trackers, the cooks, the individuals now have a trade, a profession to support this endeavor. Mechanics, vehicles are bought. The process goes on. So now, all of a sudden, the community has a stake in that lion or in that elephant, whatever the case may be. And they'll go out and they'll protect it and they'll run off the poachers. And they know who the poachers are. And so the poacher all of a sudden gets chased out because now you're goofing around with my asset. And you can't go goofing around with my asset because that means $50,000 the next time I get some guy coming in here from the United States to go hunt that lion. So don't take away my asset and my job and the 7 or 8 people that are behind me that are getting paid when I get paid or eat when I get paid. So hunting is a very good resource to maintain healthy populations, and it does have a trickle effect and it does have a benefit. Kenya stopped hunting in 1977 and their wildlife population has plummeted because it has no value. I'd like to leave you with just a few thoughts about how you can help. One way is to continue to fund such things as Namibia's LIFE program. The LIFE program was funded by USAID, IAD, and has been central to building community-based natural resource management in Namibia. Programs that promote sustainable use conservation, such as the LIFE program, are not just aid, but an investment that helps build a self-sustaining rural economy which creates community incentives and protects these treasured species that we all love. There's yet another component to the success of sustainable use conservation: reducing regulatory burdens. Oftentimes, international hunters are faced with obstacles at the United States border. Sometimes it's a problem bringing a favorite hunting rifle or bow overseas to hunt with. But more frequently, it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service stopping a hunter from bringing their legally harvested animal back into the United States. These barriers discourage hunters from traveling, reduce the value of overseas wildlife, and take much needed dollars out of rural Africa. As an aside here, if a traveling hunter in the United States was to go and purchase an elk hunt in the Rocky Mountains, it would be about the same price as if they were to go into South Africa and go on a plains game hunt. The value is about the same. Most people that are the adventurous type would just as soon go and experience the hunt in Africa on the plains, and know and oh, by the way, they're doing some good in the process. But we're having problems with U.S. regulations taking and deferring it. If you have a choice, elk hunt or a plains game in Africa, well, I'm going to go take the elk hunt because it's such a hassle getting through the border with my trophies, with my gun, traveling overseas, all of the problems that there exist. So we're confining this, which is not healthy, because remember what we've said earlier today, is that it's the hunter, in part, that supports the success of wildlife in Africa. They don't have the tax that we have here on guns and sporting equipment. They need the American hunter and the European hunter to be able to travel freely into their country to take and pursue the sport. It's vital the United States modernize the border process so wildlife and millions of dollars of African conservation dollars are not lost because of overzealous wildlife inspectors and Byzantine regulations. Our 20th century hunter brought back the great herds of the United States through the funding of conservation. All we ask is that the government helps hunters do the same in Africa. Thank you very much.
I know we're kind of running here on time. We're trying to get everybody out early, but why don't we do a little bit of question and answers? If anybody does have any questions for Joe, for Tom, this might be a good time, or for anybody else, for me. I don't know if we have any questions, comments. Adam, you want to set up the video? Anybody want to comment on the cupcakes? Okay, we'll do this video right now. We'll show this video on Namibia provided to us by, I think, the Namibian Tourism Board.
So many, many, many faces. There's a land of wide open spaces. So many, many beautiful faces. Namibia, oh,
now. This is Namibia. Prepare yourself for the unexpected. This is where you challenge the world's highest sand dunes, or explore one of the deepest canyons in the world. Where you travel back in time at one of the richest rock art sites in Africa and watch art come to life against the backdrop of one of the most stunning pans on earth. This is Namibia, where people are deeply connected to their past and excited about their future. Namibia is Africa at its best, and it is the only place in the world where you will hear and experience the greatest African wildlife recovery story ever told. A story of rights and responsibilities, of daring to set a new course, while at the same time respecting the past.
Namibia is a young country, but we have an old story to tell. We were actually growing up in an era where wildlife was a main source of income and food to the local communities, but that was not through legalized forms. And my father has been a poacher all the years, and this is how he brought us up. People were doing it illegally, according to the nature conservation official at the time.
But this was about to change. After independence in 1990, visionary conservationists in the field and in the Ministry of Environment and Tourism enacted policy changes that allowed rural communities to benefit from wildlife by forming conservancies.
This is a natural habitat for wild animals, and I think that is where we should strive to create natural habitat as it used to be.
In 1998, the first 4 conservancies were registered. Today, there are 65 communal conservancies covering well over 17% of the country and embracing 1 in 4 rural Namibians.
A conservancy is land that the government gives to the local people to look after the environment and open hospitality industries like this so that we all can get benefits at the end of the day.
The tourism industry has played a significant role in the success of community conservation. Over 30 joint venture lodges operate in communal conservancies across Namibia, providing jobs, training, income to conservancy members, and experiences of a lifetime.
We are offering our guests beautiful safaris like elephant safaris, rhino trekkings, guided walks, local village visits, because this is our home.
But this is not all that Namibia has to offer, and conservancies are just part of a vast protected areas network. Since independence, the Ministry of Environment and Tourism has spearheaded the proclamation of 7 new national parks. Namibia's conservation commitment runs deep and strong. concerted efforts of the Namibian government and the Namibian people have changed the conservation landscape from the 13% of land that was protected in 1990 to well over 42% of the country's environment that is under conservation management today.
What we have done as a country include a lot of projects which we have done, which are really could inspire the rest of the world. It's the Custodian Project, whereby we're introducing the black rhino back into the community.
In fact, Namibia is the only country in the world that is moving endangered species, such as black rhino, from national parks to communal and commercial land. The custodianship program is so successful that rhinos are now being moved from conservancy to conservancy. Namibia is also the only continental country in the world where the entire coastline is protected, stretching nearly 1,000 miles from the Kunene River in the north to the Orange River in the south. Some areas are set aside as core conservation areas, while others allow for multiple uses. It's smart, progressive conservation, and adventure tourism has a vital place within this impressive mix. It's the large landscape results that make the achievements in Namibia so significant. These aren't isolated pockets of land reserved for animals, but national parks, conservancies, and transfrontier parks with 5 neighboring countries that create a continuous conservation landscape, allowing wildlife to move freely and ecosystems to function effectively.
The Caprivi is an integral part, very small part of Namibia, but it is a very important area that allows the free movement of elephants from country to country, such as from Botswana to Namibia, Namibia to Zambia, Angola, and other way around.
Through engagement with conservancies, conservation organizations, and Namibia's professional tourism sector, you have a chance to be part of Namibia's remarkable success story.
My generation is ready to take conservation from where our forefather has left it to the future, and even my children will even take it even a step further that would add value to the existence and livelihood of our people.
So what does the greatest African wildlife recovery story ever told have to do with adventure tourism? Everything. Adventure tourism needs space. And in Namibia, the nation is committed to protecting and sharing this precious resource. Adventure tourism needs to challenge, to provide ways of testing and finding yourself. But above all, adventure tourism needs to inspire. This land, its people, its wildlife, and its remarkable stories has inspired change on a grand scale. Come to Namibia and let us inspire you.
Well, I think that's some good inspiration for the rest of the day. I'm sure everybody's going to be on Orbitz or Travelocity after this. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for Safari Club International Foundation and Joe and Tom Dillon, World Wildlife Fund. Hope to do and showcase these programs again very soon. Have a good day.